At this point, I've got everything labeled as to what's going to go where. Because I've made these lines a little darker, I'm going to lighten them up a little bit, because you really don't want to have these heavy lines separating the colors. And I did darken them just so that you could see them on this video. So I'm lightening them up before I start to paint. Now the thing that's important about doing this is that you must start with the lightest tint first. So you want to mix up quite a bit of color in your mixing trays here, in your wells, and make sure that the color you've mixed is about a 10% gray. Or if it were gray, it would be 10%. How do we use this? We take our test sheet and we're going to put our color into our brush into a color. Make sure you load the brush and then wipe it off. Don't just dip it in like like you're testing the waters here. Make sure that your whole belly has some pigment in it. And then do a swipe on a test sheet and let it dry. This way you can tell when you lay down your value chart whether or not this color is the right dilution. And you can do this with each one of these colors. That's too wet, so you need to pick it up, because really you don't want to have this lake of color. All right, so then you have blue, and if it's puddling like that, you want to pick it up because you want that blue to just be a nice even shade. Then you've got Prussian here. Again, if it's too wet, pick it up a little bit. And then your reds. Mix them up, load them up. Scarlet Lake. And the last one I'm going to do is neutral tint. And here's a swatch of neutral tint. Now you have to let these dry in order to tell the true value, because the color always dries much lighter than it appears when it's wet. So I'm going to look at these yellows. These are pretty dry now, and I can lay them down and look and see how it looks in terms of the value scale. So this is a 10% value. It looks to me like I could add just a little bit more yellow, but I think I'm going to leave them the way they are, because I can always add a second layer flat wash as I'm working. With the red, if I squint at it, these look, again, a little on the light side. I see my blues, they're dry enough. Okay, the blue looks perfect. This is ultramarine. This one is Prussian blue. And those look pretty good. And the last one is neutral tint. And that one looks good too. So we can start to work. Now what I'd like to point out is that with the yellow, you're not going to get 8 steps of value. It's too light a color. So you can end your yellow somewhere around the midway point. So I would do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then not do these in yellow. And the same is true for the cadmium yellow light. I suggest that you turn your board so that you, just like you did when you had a flat wash, because these are all flat washes, it's just going to be layers and layers of color to build the color to get it to the point where that color is pretty much at full saturation. So what we're going to do here is, this is lemon yellow. This is my lemon yellow here. Make sure I have a clean brush. All right. And then I'm going to let gravity do the work. My board should be at an angle. And you can use whatever you need to use in order to tip your board up. And load your brush. Take some of it out so you have a point, and then start to paint. And you want to paint the entire distance. If it's not wet enough, add a little bit more so you maintain a puddle at the bottom end of that wash. This is absolutely critical because you don't want this paint to get too dry on you before you finish doing what you need to do. Now the thing is here is that we have to wait now for this wash to dry. So we're going to stop here, let this dry, and you could conceivably turn your board again and get the other yellow painted. All right, so now I'm going to clean my brush and I'm going to go to the cadmium yellow light, and I'm going to do the same thing. It doesn't matter whether we do it in one direction or the other as long as you end up with a flat wash. So here we go. We can put this cadmium yellow light down. Notice the puddle. And don't leave it real wet at the top. Just bring it all down as you go. And you can do this fairly quickly as long as you work with the tip of the brush towards the edge of your shape. Notice my brush again is changing angle depending on where it is in relation to which edge I'm working on. And I have a little bit of a puddle down here which I need to pick up. And that shape is done. Now I can work this way from left to right, and we can drop in all our colors as we go along and then let them all dry. So the next one is Scarlet Lake. So I'll take my Scarlet Lake, mix up my tray so that my pigment is ready, and I'm going to go the whole distance now. Because the Scarlet Lake, because red is a little darker hue, I can get all 8 steps in this flat wash. So you want to constantly add to that puddle and move that paint along. You can see I've got quite a bit of puddle down here at the bottom. So now I'm going to change the angle of my brush and then move all that puddle to one side and pick it up. All right, that's as far as we can go, and then we'll move on to permanent rose. So load your brush again and same process. Always make sure you have enough puddle at the bottom of your wash so that it doesn't start to streak. Once it starts to dry, leave it alone. Don't mess with it. You can tell when it's still wet because it's really shiny. All right. Next, ultramarine blue, our favorite color. But because it's so light, it's going to go down pretty well. Again, make sure you have enough puddle. Don't let it sit. And down here at the end, we're in pretty good shape. Okay, ultramarine, Prussian blue. You can use the side of the brush. Notice how much of the side of the brush I'm using to cover a lot of territory in the middle. And then as I go towards the edges, I lift the brush and just work with the tip of the brush. You'll get the hang of this. Just takes a little practice. Well, actually, it takes a lot of practice. But it'll come. All right, Windsor Violet. So we'll go all the way to neutral tint. And last is neutral tint. I feel like you have a little too much water in the brush. Just touch it to your paper towel or whatever you're using as a block or as a pad and blot it out. Got a little sloppy there. We'll see if we can clean that up. Okay, so there you have your first layer of color. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start at this end again, but I'm afraid what we really should do is wait for everything to totally dry before you start the next layer. And then you can work from left to right again, just as you did before. I'm going to speed this up a little bit and do our lemon yellow right away. So this is going to be our dark side. This is going to be our light side. So what we want to do is we want to maintain the 10% value all across this first section. Then we go to 20, 30, 40, and so forth. Now with the yellow, that's going to be a little different because This is going to be 100%, but that 100% yellow probably won't be much more than 40% on the value scale. So we'll see how this works out, and then, but what you're going to do is you're going to use the same concentration of color. You're not going to change and add more pigment. You're going to work just with this 10% saturation that you've built. Because when I put 10% down here, I now have 20% value in my yellow. And now we have to wait for it to dry. And you can see how quickly the yellow starts to darken up. That's why you can only do about 5 steps with the yellow. Now I think this is dry enough. I'm going to flip it around just so I can do this other yellow. And now we're going to start at the top, but we have to leave this one unpainted. So we're going to do this next layer. And you're going to stop for the 10%. And I can do the Scarlet Lake because this is dry enough now I can put my hand down. All right, so Scarlet Lake is next. Again, we're going to save this last one. Make sure you have a puddle. Pull it down. As you start to run out of puddle, don't let it run out. Whenever you go back to the paint, you're going to add more puddle. Because you can always lift it after. All right, that's your second step. And we're going to do this with every single one of these. You're going to put another second flat wash, and then a third flat wash. And then when you do the third flat wash, you're going to skip the first 2 blocks. And then you're going to skip the first 3, and then so on and so forth. You can continue to work this way. If you decide to work this way, start with the neutral tint and fill in at this direction and work across if you feel like you would rather have the tints at the top. So that's what needs to be done.